What is up, everybody? Welcome in to the post-draft edition of Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast. He is Ryan Talbot. I am Matt Parrino. We had 3 straight days of action. The rosters around the NFL look a lot different, including the Buffalo Bills. And we're going to get into all of the good stuff. We're going to give you our grades. We're going to talk about the day 3 guys. We're going to kind of look ahead and maybe what else the Bills can do to finalize this roster. Ryan, how much fun did you have this weekend? Because this is your time of year.
Hey, I had a great time. Made a little more challenging. My wife went to go see her best friend for the weekend, so juggling the draft, the kids, the animals, it was a little more challenging this year, but love the draft nonetheless.
Listen, that is a power move there by Joelle. My hat's off to her. If I was wearing one, I would tip of the cap. That is just get out of the chaos. Go, live it up a little bit for a couple of days. That's very nice.
Yeah. Friends like 6 months pregnant, so it was going up there doing like a little
so it wasn't
together and
so there was a little bit of they weren't like going out and hitting the town too much.
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. So the Bills went into day 3 with 2 picks. They left it with 3. They went into the draft with 6 picks. They end up with 6. And I know we talked a lot about it on Thursday night about the Bills' aggressive move to move up to get Dalton Kincaid, cost them a 4th round pick. Well, they end up leaving with the same amount of picks that they had going in. Let's start with their first pick on day 3. And it's an interesting one for a lot of different reasons. Wide receiver Justin Shorter out of Florida, a guy that if you go back, Ryan, to when he was coming into college football in 2018, he was that dude. He was the number 1 wide receiver prospect in that class going in. He was a 5-star recruit. I mean, the sky was the limit for this guy. And he started at Penn State, transferred to Florida. The production never really, met up with the hype around him coming out of high school. Now, he said yesterday that a lot of it had to do with, the injuries, changing schools, whatever the reason may be. But this is an athletic freak type of player, 6'4", big body guy, 230. And so this is a situation, Ryan, where they like the player from a developmental perspective for a wide receiver, but also he's going to come in from day 1, 4-phase special teamer. He's excited to contribute in that part of the game. An interesting prospect to kind of watch here, day 3, the first guy they get.
Yeah, like you said, imagine 2018 being ranked ahead of Jalen Waddle and Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamar Chase. That's exactly where Shorter was in terms of the prospect rankings. And injuries did hurt him quite a bit throughout his college career at different stops. But the Bills brought him in for a top 30 visit. They did their homework on him. Shorter had shared on his social media the field house, and they apparently loved what they heard. And like you said, he's going to come in. He's going to play special teams. He might maybe he'll be like a red zone weapon for him this year on offense. You can kind of line him up there, like you said, 6'4", good athlete, could really make a nice living as a rookie doing a role like that. And it's also maybe potentially some Gabe Davis insurance. Gabe Davis is entering the final year of his rookie deal. We've talked a lot about how much number 2 wide receiver contracts are these days. It's very high. And I know the Bills love Gabe Davis. Maybe they'll work something out that meet in the middle, so to speak. But it never hurts having another weapon here that you think you can develop, turn into someone that could become more of a regular contributor. So the pick itself made a lot of sense based on the due diligence the Bills did on him and the need for a wide receiver.
Comment here in the chat, is this a guy similar to DK Metcalf? I think, first of all, it's dangerous comparing anybody to Metcalf. He's kind of a unicorn in the way that he's so built, he's so big, and he runs so fast. He ran a 4.33 at the combine. Shorter's in the 4.5s. Different level of speed for sure for Metcalf. But the type of receiver that he is, I don't think he's going to, beat a lot of guys at the line of scrimmage with, nuanced route running, especially early on. This is a guy that wants to try to run past you at the second level. In a lot of ways, reminds you, to your point, of a Gabe Davis in the way that he wins and has had some big plays over the course of his career. I like the pick. It's somebody that I feel like has a super high ceiling, maybe a lower floor from some of those other middle of the road wide receiver guys. But I think he had a 5th round grade or maybe I got to go back and look, 5th or 4th round grade from Dane Brugler. But it's a position. Listen, Ryan, from a 30,000 foot view perspective, a lot of people wanted the Bills to go into this draft and to find weapons, right? And I think they went out and got arguably the best in the draft in Kincaid, depending on who you talk to. Daniel Jeremiah, I still think, is throwing down love notes to Brandon Beane for drafting Kincaid on day one. He absolutely loved the pick. But in shorter, this is a wide receiver class that the elite of the elite, they're all smaller guys. This is a more traditional big body outside receiver. And I think that with, going out and getting Kincaid, having Deontay Hardy on the roster already, I kind of liked this style of player and where they got him.
Yeah, agreed completely. Different than the guys that were going in the first round in terms of the size, in terms of where he wins. You mentioned he needs to work on the route running a little bit. Well, he's going to be seeing Stephon Diggs at that facility, one of the best route runners in this league. I'm sure you can pick up a lot from him. And on day 3, when you're a championship team, when you have a championship roster, you take your swings at guys like this, because it's hard to find guys on day 3, late day 3, round 5, 6, 7, that are going to be absolute locks to make the roster. Shorter has the opportunity due to his size, due to the type of player he was coming out. If you can get any of that, keep him healthy, he could end up being a really nice, pleasant surprise for this team.
Yeah. And, you look at the attitude and the stuff that you mentioned, like the Bills really liking the person, right? Like, he has a chip on his shoulder. I mean, he might have at one time been this hyped up prospect, but he's a far away from that. And he's, coming in here with a chip on his shoulder, knowing he has something to prove. I think he landed in a really nice spot. A guy like Gabe Davis, who has just gone through this process of the first few years of his career, can probably shed a lot of light on what this is going to look like for him as he tries to earn any kind of opportunity he can. And then Stephon Diggs. I mean, if you want to try to improve your game, raise your stock from a route running perspective, I'm not sure there's many more receivers in the league that you'd want to be in the same wide receiver room with. Shorter said something interesting. He said he spent a lot of time over the recruiting trail with new wide receivers coach Adam Henry, and they built a really good relationship. So I feel like if you're getting a stamp, a check mark from Adam Henry at this point, a very seasoned veteran wide receiver coach who's worked with a lot of elite talent over the course of his career, I think you got to be excited for that. And then I like also the confidence level. And Brandon even mentioned it yesterday. Like, this is not a guy that's lacking for any confidence. He comes in here and says he's getting ready to tear the league up when he gets his opportunities. I think you like that kind of energy coming out of a guy that, is going to have to do a lot of work to find any type of meaningful role.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Henry, the wide receivers coach, because I'm sure it's always been this way, but it feels like we heard more in this draft class about those wide receivers coaches, the O-line coach, when it came to the Osiris Torrence deal, kind of giving their stamp of approval, saying, this is someone I can work with, this is someone I can develop, bring along. And Osiris Torrence doesn't need to be brought along like a Shorter does, but it's nice to hear that these guys probably pounded the table for these specific players when they were on the board, and they think they can come in and become instant contributors. So really excited to see what Shorter can do. The Bills have big numbers now at wide receiver, including Shakir coming back. We've already talked about Diggs and Davis, obviously. Hardy, who they signed in free agency, Trent Sherfield. So it's going to be intriguing to know how many end up making the 53-man roster. But, you never say never when it comes to Justin Shorter, based on the elite type of athlete that he is and where he once was, if they can kind of scratch the surface on that.
Mm-hmm. We're going to go pick by pick here. We're going to give our grades. We'll start with Shorter. Obviously, we've been talking about him for a few minutes here. I'm giving the pick a B+, Ryan. I think that there's upside. I think that you might have been able to find a defensive tackle maybe in this range, especially if you would have stuck and pick at 137. But we're going to talk about this in a little bit. But Brandon Beane was determined on day 3 to add capital in 2024, which I think is really smart. You go in with 10 picks next year and you all of a sudden become a really potentially aggressive team to go out and get a few players that you really like. I mean, there's some exciting wide receiver prospects in that draft. Maybe you go defensive line heavy next year if you like that class, however it ends up kind of materializing. But I really like this Shorter pick with where they got him. I give it a B+.
Yeah, I'll give it a B. And you mentioned the extra assets the Bills were able to get by moving around the draft board on day 3, and next year's class is supposed to be stronger. So having the extra assets that you can use to kind of move up or move around the board is never a bad thing. But Shorter himself, he's a player that has a legitimate chance of making this roster. So in the 5th round, I think that that's worth at least a B.
Sticking out on their board in the 7th, they did not make a pick in the 6th because of the 3 trades that they made. They ended up getting 2 7th-round picks, and they started with Ole Miss offensive lineman Nick Broeker. And listen, if this guy doesn't fit the Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott mold of offensive lineman, I don't know what does. He could come in here day one, willing to play all 5 positions on the offensive line. It almost feels like, in a lot of ways, the new version of Ryan Bates, like when they got him from Philadelphia a couple years ago, guy that played guard and tackle in college, willing to maybe try some center here with the Bills. And this is, to me, doubling down. They started with Osiris Torrence at 59. This is obviously a position group that the Bills were uncomfortable with last year in terms of what they got production wise. They upgrade with, Connor McGovern, potentially David Edwards too, but that wasn't enough for Brandon Beane. He hit it hard in the draft with Torrence first. We'll get to that in a minute. I really, really liked this draft pick here in Broeker, who, maybe on their board was maybe a late 5th, 6th round pick in their mind.
Yeah, and Broeker, again, a player that the Bills did their due diligence on. They did a Zoom interview with him ahead of the draft. I'm sure they met with him possibly the pro day as well. So someone that they like, and you mentioned it. He is kind of the jack of all trades, can play all 5 spots. The Bills love players with versatility that can do that. And now this is almost every year, Matt, I feel like the Bills going with a ton of guards, a ton of guys competing for a few spots. And it's going to make training camp that much more interesting, because you mentioned Connor McGovern, you mentioned Ryan Bates, obviously David Edwards. They draft 2 more guards here, and Ike Butker's back as well. So it's gonna be a fight to make this roster. And even if Broeker ends up on the practice squad, he's someone that you love for the like I said, the versatility, the ability to kind of plug and play across different spots on the line if someone goes down with an injury. So definitely worth developing. Love the fact that Brandon Beane said that he was ranked higher, significantly higher than anyone else on their board at that point. So a good value pick for the Bills. I'll go with an A for that because of where you got him in the 7th round.
Yeah, I'm going to give him an A- here. I like the player. I think A is fine too. I also think it was kind of cool reading through the notes on him. He was actually the recipient in 2022 of the Kent Hall Award, which is for the best offensive lineman in Mississippi. Obviously, the home state of Kent Hall, Wall of Famer for the Bills, the center during the Super Bowl era. Really, really cool thing. And Broeker seems like the perfect fit from a perspective situation. So that's going to be kind of fun to track that offensive line battle in camp, especially in the interior. These are going to be, Ryan, some knock them out, drag them out fights for these roster spots, and then for the starting spots. I mean, we're talking about going all the way up until September. We could have a situation where Sean McDermott's like, hey, I'm going to wait and see who really proves it over that long haul. And then that person will win the job.
Yeah, I'm excited for it as well. I almost feel like Ryan Bates might be at a disadvantage going into this because he, like Broeker, who we were just talking about, can play all 5 spots on the line. So if they like what Torrence brings, obviously 2nd round pick, 1st round type of value, you'd like to think he's going to start. You gave McGovern a good amount of money. He was a very solid guard during his stint in Dallas. Because Bates can play across the line, they might say, well, he's going to be our number 1 reserve at guard. He can be our backup at center. Being too versatile almost might cost Bates a starting job in this, but time will tell.
Mm-hmm. The Bates part of it is really interesting. We'll talk about this more when we get to Torrence. Let's get to the final pick of day 3 of the draft for the Bills. And, Sean McDermott, we've seen pictures of him in that war room in all the pictures the Bills put out. He's not letting Brandon get out of a draft without getting him a defensive back in some way, shape, or form. And I was actually surprised, Ryan, that they didn't go safety at a few spots, especially some of those trade backs. There were some guys on the board that I thought that the Bills might have, thought about in different spots. They end up landing on a cornerback who's Brandon Beane said they specifically see him as a corner. Alex Austin out of Oregon State, the alma mater of Jordan Poyer. He gets to play in the same defensive backfield for a little bit anyway. See if he makes the team, of an Oregon State legend. The big thing that stands out on his scouting report, and if you want to read my story, it's up at Syracuse.com. I have all the grades listed there as well, and then a grade for the draft class. Austin has played in a zone-heavy scheme throughout college. He comes in, and he's almost the polar opposite of Kyer Elam, who played strictly man, a lot of press man in college. So now you have a guy in Austin who maybe you can, work into the mix and takes a little bit less effort and time to get them up to speed on just the concept and the techniques of being an off corner.
Yeah, and we saw that last year with Christian Benford, another guy that was a day 3 pick that played in a zone-heavy defense, and how quickly he picked it up. The same could be said possibly for Alex Austin as well when it comes to the Bills. Time will tell on that. Tough to envision him making the roster, but if he's on the practice squad, he's a guy you can develop, you can bring along over the year or two and have him come back the following year, and maybe he will be more ready for a spot. Competition is exactly what this team is all about. They're giving a guy that's a scheme fit an opportunity here. And, if he does kind of transition over to this scheme as easily as he could, based on his knowledge of being in a zone-heavy defense, he could be a pleasant surprise this summer.
I gave this move here a B+. I think that it's, whenever I give this regime full confidence when it comes to finding defensive back help on day 3. They've done it year in and year out. I mean, going all the way back to Taron Johnson, Levi Wallace was a UDFA, so I guess you could kind of throw him into the mix there as well. Dane Jackson, Christian Benford, you mentioned over and over again. They do a good job of scouting that position. All right, let's move to the first 3 picks in this draft. And I think we start with the most polarizing, and that was the 3rd round pick at number 91, where the Bills go out and get Dorian Williams, the linebacker out of Tulane. I gave this pick a C, and I didn't love doing that because after spending 15, 20 minutes with Dorian yesterday, he was at One Bills Drive. We got a chance to talk to him a little bit. The charisma and the energy exuding from the guy, you understand how a team could fall in love with him. And then the deeper that you dig into, not only his career, but last season, he was an absolute monster for the Tulane football team last year, who had a complete turnaround. You want to talk about, flipping the culture and becoming a winning program. Dorian Williams was a big reason why, and he was an absolute animal in the bowl game. Putting up insane stats. And I think long-term, the more I thought about this and why maybe I would bump it up a little bit if I was redoing the grade now, is that I think from a coverage perspective, you need speed, you need recognition ability, you need change of direction. And I think that he brings a lot of that. And this is, a regime, again, that tabbed Matt Milano in that role years ago. And, maybe we are moving more towards a positionless linebacker situation in this defense, and they're maybe not as concerned with filling that prototypical Mike position, despite Sean McDermott now having 2 top 5 guys in both of his last 2 spots. I like parts of the Williams deal. I just think that they could have maybe addressed a different spot at that position.
Yeah, I'll give it a C-. Someone in the comments of our last show, Matt, told me I needed to go outside and enjoy spring. And I guess that was the insult for not liking this pick. He talked about how he could be a fit for this team. I want to see how they're going to use him. I was not encouraged when the Bills said, yeah, we're going to start him on the outside and as a special teams contributor. That's not what you spend 3rd round draft picks on in the NFL. 3rd round should be someone that can compete for a starting role, someone that you have a big role envisioned for. And maybe they do have a bigger role envisioned for him than what we think. If it is a positionless linebacker type competition here in the summer, and you're letting the Bail Inspectors, AJ Kleins, Tyrell Dodsons compete with these younger Bernard and now with Williams, fine. By all means, maybe it's going to pan out. And I think Williams did say that Bill told him to learn both positions. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yes.
So
yes, and Brandon even said yesterday that he kind of could see him maybe getting into the mix for the Mike spot, although he said Tyrell Dodson, leader in the clubhouse at this point, if he was kind of projecting the position, which I thought was interesting. But I don't think that they're taking it off the table. It's just he's coming from a system at Tulane that was very simpler, more simplistic. This one that he's coming into with the Bills, obviously much more complex, and that might take him some time. And one of the reasons why I think Terrell Bernard struggled so much early on last year.
Yeah, exactly. And, in the third round, there were intriguing prospects at cornerback, at safety. You could have, and it wouldn't have made sense for them to go with Darnell Washington after they had just grabbed Kincaid in the first round. But I mean, a player of that caliber that was being hyped up throughout the draft process was still there, and they grabbed another guy that, one, it almost makes last year's third round pick feel like a mistake. And I don't want to write off Terrell Bernard yet, but you're kind of drafting, again, outside guy that can contribute on special teams. We liked him. Well, that's great, but I want a third round pick to be on the field, contributing and playing in some capacity. It doesn't have to be an every down starter, but a rotational piece at least. And I'm not sure if that's what the Bills got with Dorian Williams. Really fun player to watch when you look at the highlights and everything. But I'm just still skeptical on the fit.
At 59 in the second round, the Bills go out and get, what you'd think is their starting left guard or right guard of the future in Osiris Torrence out of Florida. You mentioned it. I mean, this is a guy that on most draft evaluators' boards was the top pure interior guard. Now, Peter Skoronski out of Northwestern, a lot of people are projecting him to move inside at the NFL level, but, some teams might think that he is still a tackle. So I think if you're talking about guard only, and I know that Torrance sprinkled in a little bit, yeah, I could probably play tackle if they want me to. I think that their vision for him is on the interior with the size, his ability to anchor against really big defensive tackles that are athletic, that are fast, that are quick, that are powerful. I really, really like this pick and the value. I mean, this screams, this is the complete opposite of the Boogie Basham pick for me, right? Like where that felt like you had to take him because he was, maybe sticking out on the board, but there was no real path to him, having any impactful role as a rookie. There is a direct line from the night of the draft to the starting lineup on September 8th, 9th, 10th, whenever they open up for Osiris Torrence in this offensive line. And that is exactly why, Ryan, I gave this pick, scroll up, an A+. Went all the way to the top. The value met the prospect, met the timing for need on the roster. I really like this pick by the Bills.
Yeah, this is one of two home run swings that Brandon Beane made in the draft, and I would give it an A+ as well. You mentioned it. He's the best pure guard in this draft class. And Skoronski, there's a few others that Bergeron, obviously from Syracuse, Cody Mock, all guys that have the ability to play tackle, but they're being projected to play guard. It's not easy to go from tackle to guard or guard to tackle. So it's going to be interesting to see how those three players specifically develop over time if they are kicked inside. And but Osiris Torrence, you have a player that knows the guard spot, has been dominant at the guard spot, didn't give up any sacks, hardly gave up any quarterback pressures. If you want to get more serious about the run game, he can kind of be that guy that mauls people. We talked about this on the show after the day two. You're going up against guys like Christian Wilkins, Quinnen Williams, Chris Jones, players like that. And, Philadelphia has a strong D-line. You're going to see them this year. You want someone that can go toe-to-toe with that, and that's a lot to put on a rookie, mind you. But I think Osiris Torrence is someone that's capable of doing that. Only knock against him is he's not that athletic type of guard that the Bills usually have gone for, but he's a mauler. He's a guy that if he gets his hands on you, he's not going to usually let you buy him. So in terms of value, it was a A+ type of pick because there were so many mock drafts leading up to this where the Bills took him at round 1 at number 27. To get him at 59, that's outstanding value on a really good player.
If he lands at left guard, one of the most interesting things that I want to see kind of how it develops is the impact that it has on Deion Dawkins. If he is good from the jump and he's reliable from the jump, and you're starting to, not see as much of that just immediate like pass rush block wrap losses like we saw with Roger Saffold last year. If that maybe ups the ante a little bit for Deion Dawkins, okay, I can feel more comfortable on the island out here because I'm not as worried about what's happening at left guard. I mean, in a lot of ways, when you're paying a guy $14.5 million and, the dam is breaking right next to him, I think at times that probably led to some of the problems for Deion Dawkins. He did not look nearly like the same player that he was a year ago. And he dealt with 2 bouts of COVID that year, which is crazy to even think about. But I really like the upside here for not just Torrence, but what it can mean for that offensive line. Probably Mitch Morse as well.
Yeah, it's huge for the offensive line. And think about early on in Dion's career when Feliciano, he had a good stint here. When he was playing well, it helped Dion Dawkins. Incognito, when he was playing, it helped Dawkins very early in his career. If you have a guy that's playing at a high level at guard next to you, it does. It allows you to focus on your responsibilities. You're not worried about what's happening there. And that's going to really solidify the left side of the line if that is where Torrence ends up being. I think that could also be a really positive move for Connor McGovern. I thought McGovern, when given opportunities to play right guard for Dallas, when injuries took place, he was even better at right guard than he was at left guard. I think he's solid at both, but get him at right guard, and man, then all of a sudden I think this line can be strong through there. And then who knows what that means for Spencer Brown, but you would like to think if you have someone good next to you there, it might help elevate Spencer Brown's game as well.
So the number 1 pick, Dalton Kincaid, tight end out of Utah. The Bills get aggressive, move up 2 spots. They give up a 4th round pick. Like we mentioned earlier, they ended up getting a pick back, a finish with 6 with a couple of deals that yield a couple picks for next year. I mean, this is going to be an aggressive Brandon Beane in 2024. I have a feeling with that 3rd round pick, he sees an opportunity to kind of pounce on a draft class that you're hoping is really good. And I think that's going to really, with the 10 picks now, it's going to really elevate depending on what happens. I mean, if the Bills fall short of the Super Bowl again next year, I know fans are going to be really disappointed, but it's really going to uplift all of the different parts of the offseason. I felt like there was kind of like a lull after they lost. I mean, there was so much placed on 2023 and going to the Super Bowl and competing for one that when they didn't, I felt like the air came out of the balloon a little bit. And also, obviously, everything that happened with Damar Hamlin, that I just didn't feel the same energy around the draft, especially with the fact that they didn't have as many picks as they had the year prior in the last couple. Now with 10, Ryan, this makes next year's draft, like, I think, and my laundry's done, if you heard the buzzer in the background. Did you hear it or no?
Yeah, my coffee pot just went off a minute ago too, and it had a ding,
nice,
so it's okay.
Nice. The studio is literally right next to the laundry, and I usually try not to start it when we're going live, but it's Sunday, man. We're trying to get after it, get ahead for Monday,
Absolutely, yeah. So with all the extra draft capital the Bills have, a lot can change over the course of a year, but people are saying this draft class in 2024 is supposed to be significantly better than the 2023 draft class. And if that is the case, having these extra picks to wheel and deal and move around, you can package some of those day 3 picks with one of your day 2 picks and move up and get a guy that you really covet, a guy that you think should have been a first round player. I think there's gonna be a lot more first round grades in this upcoming draft class than there were in this one. So I like the wheeling and dealing. I like the extra 6th round picks that he was able to get, especially one of them from the Texans, which you would imagine is going to be a higher 6th round pick. As much as their roster has improved, there's still work to be done with the Houston Texans.
So Kincaid here, and before we get into the draft grade for him, I want to give a shout out for your calendars. Most people have them on their phone now. If you got one like hanging from the fridge, I want you to put a little X marks the spot for May 20th. Shout returns to Wingnuts. It's our monthly live show. We're so excited about that. We'll have more on the draft from that show. We'll start to talk about OTAs. We'll get a couple looks at that point at this rookie class out on the practice field at rookie minicamp. So we'll dive into that as well. It's going to be a fun show, Ryan. May 20th, the event page is live up over at my Facebook page. You can RSVP there. We're excited. Those shows, if you haven't been out for one yet, they're fun. You get a chance to kind of experience the show, but it's kind of more just about hanging out, talking football, off air, like when we're just kind of hanging out, eating some wings, drinking some beers and talking Bills with anybody that wants to come out.
Yeah, it's, great food, great drinks when you're there at Wingnuts. And like you said, getting to hang out with Bills fans before and after the podcast makes it worth it. It makes it such a great atmosphere. So can't wait for May 20th for the next show.
Kincaid is going to be a fun one to track over the summer at training camp, how the Bills are using him. Obviously, there's all those rules around like what we can and can't report. So that'll be kind of fun to navigate. But I really like the fit of the player here, like from what he potentially can add to the offense. We talked about this 2 days ago. My biggest objective for Brandon Beane going into this draft was having a plan for a player and then going out and getting one that you can implement. Sometimes you get a player just because he's the best player on your board, but there's no way to implement him. And I mean, it wasn't necessarily the case with Kyer Elam. I think that was more of a choice that they made. But I think that there is a definitive path to a productive role in the offense for Dalton Kincaid. I gave the move a B+ because I dinged them a little bit on losing the pick. I probably would have upped it to an A- now that they got another pick back on day 3. So I think it kind of equals itself out. And the Bills have really been good in the 6th and 7th round over the years. The one talking point that I want to get into here, though, is some people that have put out the draft history, the modern draft history of a tight end in round 1. And I think that that's kind of like a faulty comparison to use, because if you look at some of those names, some of the most recent ones like Kyle Pitts or TJ Hawkinson, those guys are going into bottom 10 passing offenses in the NFL without quarterbacks. And so I think if you look at a guy like Dalton Kincaid, you got to look at the spot that he's landing. He's landing with the Bills, number 7 in pass offense last year, number 2 scoring offense last year. They have an elite playmaker already in Stephon Diggs. They're upgrading their offensive line. It's likely to be better. I just don't know if that necessarily, that argument against taking Kincaid works, because I think you got to factor in the landing spot in this Bills passing game is one of the best landing spots for a tight end, wide receiver, or running back in this draft.
Yeah, I'm going to give the move, first of all, an A. Tight ends do take a little bit longer to develop, at least historically. So I do envision, though, a big role for him out of the gate. You can line him up in the slot. It's more of a quasi 11 than it is a 12 personnel type of grouping, but you can do 12 personnel as well in the way that you traditionally use 2 tight end sets. He's a great pass catcher, great athlete, number 1 overall tight end on the draft board. As much as I love guys like Michael Mayer, Mayer would have been really good if you were looking for someone that could also block. That's the one knock on Kincaid, is he's not a great blocker, but he'll have the opportunity to learn and develop in that area, just like Dawson Knox has over the first few years of his career. He's gotten better and better each year. But Kincaid is another weapon for this offense. That's something that Bills fans and that Brandon Beane has been clamoring for. When you can get the top tight end, the top guard in back-to-back rounds, if you're a Bills fan, you should feel really happy about that. And I love what you said, Matt, about, you look at Kyle Pitts. Yeah, he had a very old Matt Ryan early on in his career, Desmond Ridder and Marcus Mariota last year. That's not a recipe for success for any kind of tight end in this league. Josh Allen, though, when you have Stephon Diggs, you have Gabe Davis, you have a good running game, you have improvements on your offensive line, Kincaid's going to have a lot of opportunities to contribute and be someone that you can line up in a variety of ways. The traditional 12 personnel, line them up in the slot. And it wasn't that long ago that the slot position was so important to this Bills offense with Cole Beasley. If he can take on that type of role for this offense, he could be very dangerous in terms of what he can do right out of the gate. And we talked about this, Matt. Look at the last 10, 12 Super Bowls. Most of those Super Bowl winners or the team in the game has a top-tier tight end. Kincaid can be that for Buffalo. I like the comparison that I shared yesterday. Like, he's a Mark Andrews type for an offense, and anyone that's watched Baltimore knows how important Andrews is to making that thing run. I think Kincaid can be a very important factor for this offense and letting them take their offense to an even higher level than before.
So let's take a look at this draft class as a whole here before we move on I want to talk about the UDFAs and maybe what Brandon Beane is going to do now that I believe his roster is sitting at about 80 right now. If the UDFA count is correct, that's a rough number because there might be some moves that have happened already, like UDFA wise, that just haven't popped out yet. So we'll put it around 80 at this point. But in terms of this draft class, if you're looking on YouTube, by the way, smash that like button. We're over 300 right now. This is on a Sunday afternoon. Everybody kind of coming down for the draft. We appreciate you. Hit that subscribe button as well. The draft class as a whole, I really liked. Brandon Beane came out afterwards and said that it wasn't his intention to go into this thing and come out with any specific haul. Like, he wanted to get a weapon. He wanted to address the defensive line, or offensive line, but it wasn't something where, come hell or high water, he's doing that without regard for anything else. I think the way that the draft felt and the aggressive spots at times that he was able to go and get a Kincaid and, getting a guy like Shorter in the 5th round with a lot of potential. And then obviously Torrence, I gave the overall grade a B+. It got brought down a little bit by the Dorian Williams situation, despite me having some hopes for him as a player. Like I want that to be clear. It's not, I didn't give that move a C because I don't think Dorian Williams can turn into a really valuable player for them. There's that possibility. I just think that with what they already have on the roster, the investment they made in Milano, the fact that they have Bernard on the roster, they have Dotson as well. I just think that resources could have been spent differently. But we'll see if he turns into a starter and a really good starter. That grade's obviously going to come up. You had to come out with weapons. You had to come out with protection for Josh Allen. Brandon Beane did both. I give it a B+.
Yeah, B+ is where I'm sticking with it as well for the overall draft grade. I'm glad they didn't press for a defensive tackle, but I felt like leaving without one was maybe something that he wasn't thrilled with, but that's just the way the board fell. There are a lot of veterans that we can get into that are out there on the market still. They could address that with. But he, like I said, 2 back-to-back home run swings to start the draft with Kincaid and Osiris Torrence. When you're picking late in the round, like the Bills were, and to be able to get 2 guys of that caliber, that's a win in my book every day of the week. So Dorian Williams, yep, he brings the grade down a little bit because I want to see what the plan is for him. Right now, I don't see the path to significant playing time on this defense right out of the gate, which, again, 3rd round, get a rotational piece, get someone that can contribute right away. Round 3 or day 3, excuse me, I did like the picks there as well, so that kind of brought it or kept it in that B+ range. Could have gone A-, but I think B+ is a good spot to have them.
Carl Tomlin, our good buddy over on YouTube, a stud receiver +1 and a stud O-line +1 is terrific. He gives the Bills an A grade. And listen, I do think that there's a lot to like. And I think for Bills fans, I hope that Dorian Williams turns into a Pro Bowler, all-pro type player. And we look back on this situation for your sakes and you say, oh, there was a real vision with that pick for Brandon Beane. And listen, Beane follows his board. Like that has to get baked in here a little bit. I could probably up it a little bit in terms of the grade because Dorian Williams must have been standing out so highly on his board and he didn't want to reach for one of the defensive tackles. And if you go back to that spot, they get Dorian Williams at 91, 2 defensive tackles go in the next 10 picks. Broderick Martin out of Western Kentucky, didn't do much work on him, wasn't very familiar with him. 2 picks later, Siaki Ika, the defensive tackle out of Baylor. I saw him going in some mock drafts in the 2nd round. So maybe that was a guy that the Bills could have considered. But again, Beane said it wasn't even a consideration because of how much they valued Williams at 91.
Yeah. So again, he sticks to the board. He stays true to the board. They like him a lot. Maybe he comes out and he does have a role in terms of that middle linebacker competition. Maybe he rotates in there. Maybe the way they utilize him in certain situations in games where you want to have more linebackers on the field, he can kind of insert himself into that role. They have a lot of bodies, though, right now at linebacker. So that's the area where I'm most intrigued in terms of how this settles. Is it something where could Medikevich be at risk? I don't know. He's such a core special teamer. He's a captain for this team. So you think there's a path for him. Maybe it's an AJ Klein. AJ, we like you. We know what you can do, but we want to have you as one of our veteran practice squad guys. There's a lot of guys fighting for this role that you and I are envisioning as like that Tremaine Edmonds role, but maybe the Bills are going in with a completely different philosophy this season. And if that's the case, that's why it's hard to kind of project this Dorian Williams pick right now.
All right, the UDFA market is wide open, and Ryan Talbot over at New York Upstate and Syracuse.com right now. If you click it, you can find the UDFA tracker. Ryan's, I would say this is maybe top 3 favorite things that you do all year long, and you do a great job of it. So I think it's one of those things that we got to cover it a little bit. There's a couple that have been reported, one by you, or at least one by you. Why don't you take us through some of the names that have reportedly already signed with the Bills, UDFA, undrafted free agents?
Yeah, so one that's not a UDFA signing, but interesting to people from around this area, a rookie minicamp invite, James Patterson, linebacker, UB. So he'll be at the rookie minicamp, get an opportunity to show what he can do, maybe sign a UDFA deal after that. They went back to Florida, and I'm going to butcher his last name, but Richard Gouraige, Gouraige. Florida offensive lineman, a teammate, obviously, with all of a sudden Buffalo has a lot of Florida Gators on this team. So another Florida Gator coming in here. Tyrell Shavers, that's the one that I was able to report. interesting, played at Alabama and Mississippi State before he joined San Diego State. 3 touchdowns this past season, 6 feet, 6 inches tall. So the Bills are looking for those bigger wide receivers after drafting a 6'4" receiver. They had a 6'6" wide receiver in Tyrell Shavers. Jordan Mims, running back, Fresno State. I think a lot of fans thought maybe a running back would be in play late in the draft. They had one in undrafted free agency. 37 career touchdowns at Fresno State. A guy that has a nose for the end zone. Maybe he ends up being, like Blackshear was last year, where fan favorite ends up on the practice squad, and who knows from there. DJ Dale, that's one, name value wise, he was someone that was kind of I want to say a surprise undrafted free agent, but had he been drafted, I don't think anyone would have blinked an eye. Alabama defensive lineman, 10.5 tackles for loss in his career, 5.5 sacks. Someone that could end up winning one of those roster spots on the D-line. Intriguing wise, Jalen Wade is a name to watch. Cousins with former Colts wide receiver Reggie Wayne. I'm a big believer in good bloodlines and how, the athleticism, the traits that could be there. So Jalen Wade, 58 catches, 816 yards, 9 touchdowns at South Alabama this past season. A name to watch and kind of keep an eye on. Yeah, Beth, I was just saying like a Blackshear situation in the comments here. Didn't he leave? Yes, he's not with the Bills anymore, but he was a fan favorite because of how he produced, and he was on the practice squad for a while before he ended up leaving this team and going to Carolina. And then last but not least, Noah Henderson, East Carolina offensive tackle. I'm glad they're at least addressing the offensive line, looking for options there, seeing how he holds up. 26 career starts at East Carolina.
I really like for me, the one that really sticks out is the offensive lineman from Florida, our good buddy in the chat. I think it's Rick Rarick there, pronounced Garage. So Richard Garage.
Yeah, so I was pretty close.
Tackle out of Florida. There you go. 6'5", 306. Listen, there's some value here. I think it's a bit of a surprise in a league where guys are, tackles are a commodity, that this guy didn't get drafted. He had a 6th-round grade, I believe, from Dane Brugler, and played with Osiris Torrence on the same offensive line. So you look at it just from a adjustment period for, 2 rookies having each other to kind of come into camp, go through the process with. I think that's really exciting. A couple wide receivers, I think that they do a really good job. I mean, they've done over the last couple of years, the guys that they bring in that turn into these gotta keep them. And, I know Kumaro and Duke Williams weren't necessarily UDFAs, but in that realm where they get guys into their building, they have some success, maybe they have some good times in preseason, and they add to, the competition, which, listen, those back end cornerbacks, they need good reps too. And so if you have that kind of quality player lower on the depth chart, I think it helps everybody involved. So I think some exciting developments here early in the UDFA period.
Yeah, and the Bills always find a few guys, maybe they're not on the 53-man roster, but they stick around in the practice squad. They develop over time. They get opportunities. Kingsley Jonathan was one last year out of Syracuse. I thought he was pretty impressive when he was in one of the regular season games last year. Over the year, Eli Anku was another one that they had at one point that's played. So these guys, even if they don't make the 53-man roster, a lot of them get elevated and get opportunities because of injuries, and a lot of them have fared pretty well here in Buffalo.
All right, before we get out of here, some news coming out of Brandon Beane's press conference yesterday. Sure, he was annoyed and not happy that the Bills didn't get a defensive tackle in the draft, but they were talking to some defensive tackles apparently before the draft and said, listen, let's put this thing on ice for a week or so. We'll get back together after the draft. And so now you look at, we talked about this, I think 2 months ago, Ryan, Poona Ford, somebody, or a month ago, I should say, somebody that, from Seattle, who's still sitting out there on the free agent market as somebody that the Bills, maybe already had some interest in, and maybe they can kind of get those talks going again this week, because starting on Monday, the comp pick formula is thrown out the window. You can sign anybody you want to any type of number, and it doesn't count against that. That is set in stone come Monday. And I think, listen, the Bills don't have a ton of money, but I think that they have the availability in terms of contract restructures, even at this point, if they had to do it, to maybe go up a little bit higher to get a return on investment and put some pressure on the Tim Settles of the world and the Jordan Phillips of the world, because I don't think you want to just go into year 4 and say, all right, this is our 4, kind of put it on cruise control through training camp and preseason, and we'll roll the ball out and go in that direction again. I think if you bring a guy like Poona Ford in, I think it puts pressure on all parties, maybe even a guy like Ed Oliver, who is going into the final year of his contract and, obviously wanting that extension, and Bills maybe still pondering whether or not they want to do that.
Yeah, listen, Poona Ford would be great. There was mutual interest on both sides. The sticking point was the money. The Bills went out and they were signing everyone for that 1 year, $1.7 million range because of the compensatory pick. Now, like you said, Monday, it's out the window. So maybe the Bills up that offer, whether it's a 1 year or a multi-year deal to get him into the door. That would help ease the pain of not drafting a defensive tackle significantly. There's still veterans, older guys like Al Woods that are out there if they're looking for a bigger D tackle. I feel like he's well over 300. I could be wrong on that off the top of my head. But there are some veteran names at D tackle, at edge rusher, at even offensive tackle. The Bills could look at to provide depth and or even some competition for Spencer Brown. It might not be someone that you would favor to defeat Spencer Brown, but there are still names out there. There's George Fant on the market, I believe. They had shown interest in, I'm blanking on his name now, Dolphins offensive tackle last year. There was mutual interest there too. So that could be the case as well here. So keep your eye out on that. And even a running back, Latavius Murray, they brought him in before the draft, visited with him. They didn't draft a running back, They brought in a UDFA, but maybe even Murray comes in here and competes for a camp spot.
A lot of people watching on YouTube. We're so thankful that you're spending part of your Sunday with us. Hit that like button, subscribe to the show as well. To your point, Ryan, I mean, if you're talking about defensive tackles, there are still some intriguing names, and it's unbelievable how many players there are. I mean, Frank Clark, we've talked about him, Yannick Ngakoue, Jadeveon Clowney, I mean, Matt Ioannidis. I mean, there are some edge rushers. But then you look at the interior, Shelby Harris, a guy that, played all those really good years in Denver, went over to Seattle in the Russell Wilson trade. He's now available on the market. Akeem Nicks, obviously a little bit older at 33, but if you still think there's a little bit of juice there. And then, I was scrolling through some of the names here. Remember an old friend, somebody the Bills fans were so bummed that was cut a couple years ago, ended up going to Cleveland. Vincent Taylor is still out there available. He's still in his late 20s. I think that could be somebody that if you want to just take a roll of the dice. Point being made, there is a lot of players available out there, and I think the Bills can, it's smart to go out and add, especially at that position.
Yeah, and Brandon Shell was the name of the offensive tackle that I was blanking on from the Dolphins. Bills had interest in him. But yeah, defensive tackle, you just named a bunch of guys that can come in and a lot of experience, a lot of playing time in their careers, someone that could be a rotational piece. So the good news for the Bills is that's still one of those positions, both D tackle and edge rusher, with a lot of talent on the market. And now that the comp picks formula is out the window, the Bills are going to get that extra third next year, most likely, for Tremaine Edmonds. You can maybe up your offers to some of these guys that you have some interest in.
Jessica asks on Tommy Doyle, do you think he'll be ready for the season? I mean, he was walking pretty quickly after that injury, and I think it happened at a place in time in the season that
Miami,
he's young.
I think week 3.
Yeah, week 3. So I think that he'll be, well on schedule. I think we'll maybe get a chance to see him here in OTAs in a couple of weeks, see where his progress is. Is he able to kind of go in the team drills at all? Do they work him in at that point? And we'll probably get kind of more of an update then about that. But start of the season, yeah, I think the lack of aggressiveness at tackle probably tells you that they believe that Doyle will be ready to go, because I know they have Quessenberry. I'm not as high on him as maybe they are, and maybe they'll continue to be. And maybe year 2 in the system with, Aaron Cromer, things will be better for Quessenberry. But Doyle's got to be a guy here for them. I mean, there's not a lot of numbers after Spencer Brown and Deion Dawkins.
Yeah, that's well said. You expect him, I would think, to be back. Young guy, happened so early in the year. Only reason I remember it was that Dolphins game is the Bills players, because of cramping and other issues and injuries, were dropping like flies in that game. And Doyle played, I think, the last 5 snaps on that, knowing that he had that injury, and just really gutted it out for the team. So you think he'd be back. There's going to be some competition there for the reserve role if it stays as is, but maybe they can bring someone in that could at least push Spencer Brown for the starting role.
Push your keyboard or your thumb on your phone wherever you're watching, or your iPad. I don't know. I mean, if it's on the TV, I don't know how you do that. A lot of people watching the TV actually.
Yeah.
Our good buddy Bernardo Dietze from Brazil. He just had his new little girl, and he posted on Instagram watch and shout while he was feeding the baby. And I thought that was so awesome. Had it up on the big screen TV. So that was really cool. But if you're able on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe to the show as well. Get out your calendar, May 20th, shout live at Wingnuts. Come out, eat wings, drink beers, talk Bills with us. He's Ryan. I'm Matt. I hope we had you covered all weekend for the draft. We're going to get things, shifted up again. Not next week, but the following week, rookie mini camp, our first look at all these new players for the Bills. We'll have you covered there. We'll have our regular show on Wednesday. Have a great rest of your Sunday.